The envelope was sitting on my kitchen table when I got home from work. Plain white, my name written in shaky cursive that I hadn't seen in 3 years, the handwriting of a dying man. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, coat still on, keys still in my hand. My neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the hall. The radiator was hissing. Everything was completely ordinary except for that envelope, and the fact that my father had been dead for 6 weeks. He must have sent it before he passed. Or had someone send it for him. I didn't know which possibility scared me more. I sat down. I didn't take my coat off. I just sat there staring at it, and something in my chest cracked open a little, not from grief, not exactly, from something older than grief. The specific ache of a child who spent her whole life waiting to be seen by the one person who was supposed to see her most. My name on that envelope, just my name, not my sister Renee's name, not the girl's, just mine, Maya. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible inside your own family? Not the dramatic kind of invisible. No one was cruel to me. No one locked me in a basement. No one called me names. It was quieter than that. Gentler, almost, which somehow made it worse. It was birthdays where Renee's gifts took up 3/4 of the table. It was school plays where Mom leaned over to Dad and whispered about how Renee would have been better in the lead role. It was Christmases and graduations and Sunday dinners where I sat at the edge of everything, eating quietly, watching my own family love someone else just a little bit more than they loved me. And I never said a word. That was the thing about me, I never said a word. I was the good one, the easy one, the one who didn't make trouble, didn't ask for too much, didn't demand to be noticed. I thought if I was patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, eventually they'd look up from Renee and see me standing there. They never did, not really, not until that envelope. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. There was something stiff inside, not just paper. My name on the front and on the back, sealed with tape over the flap the way Dad used to do whenever he sent documents. Official, deliberate. My hands were shaking when I opened it. What I found inside didn't just change my understanding of my father. It changed everything I thought I knew about my sister, my inheritance, my past, and the 31 years I'd spent believing that maybe I just wasn't worth fighting for. I was wrong. My father had been fighting for me the whole time. I just didn't know it yet. Hey, everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, this channel is where I share true stories, real experiences, raw emotions, and the moments that change us when we're not expecting them to. I'm Maya, and today I'm telling you something I've never said out loud before. Not to my friends, not to my therapist, not to anyone. This is the story of how I grew up as the forgotten daughter in a family where love wasn't divided equally, and how a single sealed letter from my dead father tore apart 30 years of silence in one afternoon. This one's long because the truth deserves the time. Grab a drink, get comfortable. And if this story touches you the way I think it might, drop a comment below, just the word letter, so I know you're with me. Let's go back to the beginning. I grew up in a beige house on a street full of beige houses in a town where nothing much happened, and everyone knew everyone else's business except, somehow, no one ever noticed mine. My parents were Gerald and Patricia Holloway. Dad worked in insurance, quiet, methodical, a man who kept receipts for everything and cried exactly once a year, always at the same Thanksgiving commercial. Mom was a school administrator, efficient, organized, the kind of woman who sent holiday cards in November and kept a color-coded calendar on the fridge. They were, by all appearances, a perfectly normal couple raising 2 perfectly normal daughters. Renee was 4 years older than me. She arrived into the world first and loudest, and she never really stopped being both of those things. She was the kind of girl who filled every room she walked into, not unkindly, just thoroughly. Bright, energetic, funny when she wanted to be, dramatic when it served her. She had Mom's sharp cheekbones and Dad's blue eyes, and everyone who met her remembered her. I had Dad's quiet face and nobody's eyes in particular, or so I was told. I was average height, average grades, average everything. I didn't play sports or sing or dance or do anything that made people stop and stare. I read books. I kept a journal. I was good at listening, which meant I spent a lot of my childhood listening to other people be interesting. The favoritism wasn't screamed. That's the part I need you to understand. My parents didn't sit down and decide to love Renee more. It wasn't a choice they made consciously. It was just the invisible current that ran through our household, steady and quiet as water under ice. Renee's achievements were celebrated with dinner reservations and framed photos. Mine were noted briefly and moved on from. Renee's struggles got long kitchen table conversations and Mom's hand on hers. Mine got a pat on the shoulder and "You'll be fine, Maya. You always are." And the worst part? They were right. I always was fine. Because I taught myself to be fine so I wouldn't need anything from them, so I wouldn't be a burden, so I wouldn't make it worse. Dad was different from Mom in one specific way that I clung to as a child. He noticed me sometimes. Not often, not loudly, but sometimes. He would knock on my bedroom door on Sunday evenings and ask what I was reading. He'd sit on the edge of my bed, and for 20 minutes he was just mine. No Renee, no Mom, no dinner to get back to. He'd listen to me describe whatever book I was lost in, and he'd ask real questions, the kind that meant he was actually paying attention. Those 20 minutes were the center of my world for most of my childhood. But then Renee would call from downstairs or Mom would need him for something, and he'd stand up, ruffle my hair, and say, "You're something else, Maya Bird. Don't let him forget it." I never understood what he meant by that, not until the letter. When I was 16, Renee left for college, and the house became quieter in a way that I thought would finally make space for me. Instead, Mom threw herself into planning Renee's visits, redecorating Renee's room for when she came home, talking on the phone with Renee for hours. I was still there, in the next room, doing homework, becoming a person, but I might as well have been furniture. Dad started working longer hours that year. I don't know if it was financial stress or something between him and Mom, but he was less present, and those Sunday evenings got shorter and then stopped altogether. I graduated high school. No one threw a party. Renee had gotten a party. I went to a state school 2 hours away, paid mostly with loans I'd applied for myself because I was too proud to ask my parents to fight for me the way they'd fought for Renee's college fund. I studied social work, which felt right. I'd spent my whole life paying attention to people who were struggling, noticing things others missed. I was good at it. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had a small apartment, a job I was proud of, and a relationship with my family that I can only describe as politely distant. Holiday visits. Birthday calls, usually a day late. Facebook likes on my photos from Mom. The standard equipment of a family that hadn't actually broken apart but had never really been whole. Renee, meanwhile, had married well, a man named Douglas who wore fleece vests and had a firm handshake, and had 2 kids by 30. She lived 20 minutes from our parents. She was there for Sunday dinners. She was there for Dad's doctor appointments when his heart started giving him trouble. She was present in the way that I, 2 hours away with a job and a life, was not. I told myself it was fine. That distance was just geography, that it didn't mean what I was afraid it meant. Dad got his diagnosis 18 months before he died, stage 3 heart failure. He declined slowly at first, and then all at once, the way those things go. I drove home on weekends when I could. I held his hand. I watched him become smaller in the big hospital bed in the room that used to be the guest room. And through all of it, Renee was there managing, organizing, being efficient the way Mom always was, making sure everything was handled. I felt like a visitor in my own family's grief. When Dad passed on a Tuesday morning in October, I was not in the room. Renee was. Mom was. I was in the parking lot, having stepped out to take a phone call from my supervisor about a case. I came back upstairs, and the nurse met me at the door with a look on her face, and I knew. I stood in the hallway outside his room, and I didn't cry. I just stood there, thinking about Sunday evenings, thinking about Maya Bird, don't let him forget it. I didn't know then that he'd already made sure of that. The will reading happened 2 weeks after the funeral in the office of a man named Arthur Kemp who had been my father's attorney for over 20 years. I drove down for it. Renee and Douglas were already there when I arrived. Mom looked like she hadn't slept since October. I sat in a green leather chair across the desk from Arthur Kemp and tried to make my face neutral. I was good at neutral. The will was straightforward mostly. The house would go to Mom. The retirement accounts split between her and Renee, with a portion set aside for Renee's kids' education. Personal belongings to be divided as Mom saw fit. And then a cash amount, Dad's savings, his investment account, the money he'd spent 40 years building carefully. My name appeared exactly once, near the end, in a clause that allocated me a sum that was, to be precise, less than a quarter of what Renee received. I heard Mom exhale. I heard Renee say something quiet to Douglas. I heard the clock on Arthur Kemp's wall ticking. I kept my face neutral. "There's also a sealed addendum," Arthur Kemp said, and he placed a second envelope on the desk, the same plain white, the same shaky cursive. But the one on his desk said for Maya to be opened 6 weeks after my passing. Renee looked at it, then she looked at me. Her expression was something I couldn't read right then, something that might have been guilt or might have been annoyance. I wasn't sure which one scared me more. "The addendum is for Maya's eyes only," Arthur Kemp said. "Those were your father's explicit instructions." Mom nodded like she already knew about it. Renee didn't nod, she just looked at her hands. Arthur Kemp slid the envelope across the desk toward me. I picked it up. It was the same envelope that would later appear on my kitchen table 6 weeks from that day, forwarded to my address by the attorney exactly as my father had instructed. I didn't open it in that office. I put it in my bag, and I drove home, and I put it in a drawer, and I tried not to think about what it might say. Because what if it was nothing? What if it was just some small note, a few warm words, a memory, a goodbye? What if I'd spent my whole life being the forgotten daughter and the sealed letter was just his way of easing his own conscience? I wasn't ready for nothing, so I waited. 6 weeks later, almost to the hour, it appeared on my kitchen table, and I had to open it. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten on Dad's yellow legal pad paper, the kind he kept in his desk drawer for 30 years. His handwriting was shaky. The medication did that to him near the end, but it was deliberate. Every word placed carefully. You could tell he'd thought about this for a long time. He started by telling me he loved me. That alone almost broke me. Not because I doubted it, but because he'd said it so rarely out loud, and seeing it written there, in pen, permanent, it took me a long time to get past that first sentence. Then he got to the point. He told me that 3 years before he died, when he first started having heart trouble, he had consulted with Arthur Kemp about his estate. He had initially planned to divide everything equally between Renee and me, but then he discovered something that changed his plans entirely. Renee had borrowed money from him, not once, repeatedly. Over the course of about 7 years, she had come to him with one thing after another: credit card debt, a failed investment, the down payment on the house she and Douglas bought, a business idea Douglas had that never went anywhere. Dad had given her money each time, quietly, without telling Mom, without any formal agreement. The total, by the time he wrote the letter, was $94,000. I had to stop reading. I set the pages down on the table. I stood up and walked to the window and looked at the parking lot outside my building for about 2 minutes. My upstairs neighbor was walking to their car. The streetlight was flickering. Everything completely ordinary. $94,000. I sat back down and kept reading. Dad wrote that he hadn't planned to tell me any of this. He had considered just adjusting the will quietly, giving me a larger share to compensate, without explaining why. But then he had a bad week in the hospital, one of those weeks when the doctors came in with serious faces and talked about things he wasn't ready to hear, and he decided he owed me the truth. "You deserve to know," he wrote. "Not so you would be angry at your sister, but so you would understand that the imbalance in this family was never about your worth. It was never about you not being enough. It was about me not being brave enough, not with your mother, not with Renee, and not with you." I let too much go unsaid. I am trying, here at the end, to say some of it. My hands were shaking badly by this point. He went on. He said that the smaller bequest I'd received in the will, that disparity, was not the full picture. He had set up a separate account, years ago, in my name only, funded quietly over time. The account held just over $87,000. Arthur Kemp had the details. He had chosen not to include it in the formal will proceedings because he had not wanted a confrontation, had not wanted Renee to feel accused in front of a lawyer. He wanted me to have the information first, to decide what to do with it. But that wasn't all. The last 2 pages were harder to read. They were about Mom. They were about the years I'd spent feeling invisible, and he acknowledged it, plainly, without excuses. He said he had watched it happen and had not done enough to stop it. He said that Mom loved me truly, but that she had always found Renee easier to understand and had leaned toward her without meaning to. He said he had told Mom this once, years ago, and they had fought about it, and he had let it drop because keeping the peace felt easier than pressing the wound. "That was the wrong choice," he wrote. "I made it anyway, and I am sorry. I am more sorry for that than for almost anything else in my life." Then he said something that stopped me completely. He said Renee knew about the loans. Of course she knew, she'd asked for them. But she also knew, he said, that he had intended to balance the estate. She knew he was sick. She knew the will was being revised. And sometime in the last year of his life, she had come to him and asked him, gently, carefully, whether he really needed to leave a note for Maya, whether it might just upset things unnecessarily, whether it might be better to let the estate settle quietly and move on. He had told her no. He had told her he was writing the letter. She had not brought it up again, but he had watched her face as he said it, and he had seen something there that he wanted me to know about. Not anger exactly, something more like calculation. Something that told him she had already decided what she would do once he was gone and couldn't say anything about it. He didn't say what he thought she would do, but he said, "Watch carefully, Maya Bird, and hold your ground." I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. Then I sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours without moving, while my dinner went cold and the streetlight outside stopped flickering and the city got quiet, turning everything over and over in my mind. I called Arthur Kemp the next morning. He confirmed everything. The account existed. The money was mine. He had been waiting for my call. He sounded relieved, actually, like he'd been carrying something heavy and was glad to finally set it down. "Your father was very thorough," Arthur Kemp said. "He was," I said, and I meant it more than I had ever meant anything. I didn't call Renee that day, or the day after. I went to work. I came home. I read the letter again. I started writing down everything I remembered, every birthday, every Christmas, every Sunday dinner, and I noticed something I hadn't let myself notice before. There was a pattern to the moments when Dad had been most present with me. They almost always came shortly after one of Renee's asks. A few weeks after she'd called in a panic about credit card debt. A month after the business venture fell apart. As if seeing her take had made him come find me, quietly, to give in the only way he knew how, 20 minutes on the edge of a bed, asking about a book. He had seen me. He just hadn't known how to say so while everyone else was in the room. The more I sat with it, the more one question pressed on me. Renee had known. She had known about the letter. She had tried to talk Dad out of writing it, and she would have known, or at least suspected, that if I ever got it, if I ever called Arthur Kemp, the financial picture would shift significantly. The hidden account, the documented loans, suddenly the will wouldn't look the way she'd expected it to look. I thought about her face at the will reading, the way she looked at the envelope. The thing in her expression I couldn't name, I named it now. It was fear. I called Renee on a Thursday evening, 9 days after I got the letter. I had spent those 9 days preparing, not preparing what to say, but preparing myself, learning how to hold the information without letting it detonate. That's a skill I'd practiced all my life without knowing that's what I was doing. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm, practiced, the voice she used when she was performing normalcy. "Maya, I was just thinking about you. How are you doing? Are you eating okay?" "I got Dad's letter," I said. 3 seconds of silence. 3 full seconds, which is a very long time on a phone call. "Oh," she said, just that. "I talked to Arthur Kemp." Another pause, shorter this time. "Okay? I think you know what was in it, Renee." She took a breath. When she spoke again, the warmth was still there but thinner now, stretched over something harder underneath. "Maya, I think what you have to understand is that Dad was very sick at the end. He was on a lot of medication." "He was?" "Don't," I said, quietly, but she stopped. I had not expected to feel this steady. I had expected to shake the way I shook reading the letter, but I was completely calm. Years of practicing neutrality, and it turned out it could also look like this, not disappearance, but stillness. The stillness before something happens. "He was specific, Renee, dates, amounts, everything. Arthur Kemp has records, I have the letter." A longer silence this time. I heard Douglas say something in the background, indistinct. I heard Renee cover the phone briefly. Then she came back, and the warmth was gone entirely. "What do you want, Maya?" Not "I'm sorry," not "let me explain." Just, "What do you want?" As if this were a transaction, as if I were the difficult one. And that was when she told me. Not because she wanted to, because she calculated that telling me would be better than me finding out another way. She had done something that Dad had not known about or had only half suspected. In the months before he died, when she was managing his affairs, handling paperwork he could no longer manage himself, she had made transfers. Small ones at first, then larger. From a secondary savings account that was in her name as a co-signer, set up years ago to help him manage bills. She had been draining it, incrementally, since the previous spring. The account she'd been draining wasn't the one Dad had set aside for me, but it was money that would have been part of the estate, money that would have been accounted for. By the time he died, somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 had moved from that account into one she controlled jointly with Douglas. She said it like she was reading a weather report. Flat, precise, like confessing was just another form of damage control. Dad knew the loans were getting complicated, she said. I was managing things. I was the one who was there, Maya, every day for 2 years. Every appointment, every prescription, every call at 3 in the morning when Mom didn't know what to do. I was the one who was present. I deserved. You deserved, I repeated slowly, not as a question, just letting the words sit in the air between us. She stopped talking. Renee, I said, you took money from a dying man, our father. While he was writing me a letter telling me he loved me and was sorry for not fighting for me harder. Nothing on the other end of the line. I'm going to talk to Arthur Kemp tomorrow, I said, and then I'm going to talk to Mom, and then we're going to figure out what happens next, but I need you to know something before any of that. I paused, not for effect, because I needed a moment to mean it completely before I said it. I'm not going to disappear, not this time. I'm not going to smile and nod and make this easy for everyone. Dad told me to hold my ground, so that's what I'm doing. I heard her breathing, steady, controlled, still calculating. You should have stayed closer, she said finally. If you'd been here, maybe things would have been different. I almost laughed, almost. Renee, I stayed away because you left no room. There was never any room. I hung up. And I sat with the silence, and for the first time in my life it did not feel like erasure. It felt like mine. I drove to Mom's house on a Saturday. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. She was in the kitchen when I let myself in with my old key, standing at the counter making tea the way she always did, kettle already boiling before she decided she wanted tea, purely out of 40 years of habit. She turned around when she heard the door and her face did something complicated, surprise, then warmth, then, almost immediately, a kind of careful look. Like she'd been waiting for this moment and wasn't sure she was ready for it. Maya, she said, sweetheart. Hi, Mom. I put the letter on the counter, all 4 pages. I didn't hand it to her, I just placed it there. She looked at it for a long moment before she touched it. She read it standing up at the counter with her tea getting cold beside her. It took a long time. About halfway through, her hand went to her mouth. She kept it there for the rest of it. When she put the pages down, she didn't look at me right away. She looked out the window above the sink at the backyard, the same yard I'd played in as a child, the same oak tree, the same broken fence post that Dad had always meant to fix. Then she turned around. Her eyes were full, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. I knew, she said. Not about the money Renee took, I didn't know that, but I knew I've always known that I didn't. She stopped, started again. I didn't make enough room for you. I know that. I've known it for years and I didn't know how to say it, and so I just didn't. I hadn't expected that. I had expected defense. Explanation. A pivot to how hard everything had been. I had prepared for all of that. I had not prepared for her to just say it. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd done 30 years of homework, eaten 1,000 quiet dinners, watched my family orbit Renee while I revolved somewhere in the outer dark. I sat down and I cried, not politely, the deep, ugly kind that you can't stop once it starts. Mom came and sat beside me. She put her hand on my back, not patting, just holding. Present, for the first time in a very long time, present with me specifically in the kitchen on a Saturday while everything else could wait. I'm so sorry, Maya, she said. I am so sorry. We sat there for almost an hour. We talked, really talked, the way we had never talked, the way I had stopped hoping we would ever talk. She told me things about her own childhood that made the pattern make more sense, not excusable, but at least decipherable. I told her things I had never said about the graduations, about the Christmases, about the Sunday evenings on the edge of my bed that had been the whole of my father's love made visible to me. She listened, actually listened. Without checking her phone or redirecting to Renee or finding a way to make the conversation easier on herself. She just listened. And then, with her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, she said the thing I needed most to hear. Not the apology, I'd had that, something else. You were never the forgotten one, Maya. You were the one I didn't know how to love right. There's a difference. And your father knew how to love you. He just didn't know how to show it where we could all see it. And that was a failure, his and mine both. But it was never because you weren't worth it. I picked up my father's letter from the counter. I held it in my lap. 4 handwritten pages from a man who had spent his whole life keeping the peace and spent his last reserves of strength making sure, at the end, that the right person had the right information, that his quiet daughter knew she had been seen. I finally let myself fully grieve him right there, at the kitchen table, 31 years of invisible grief and 45 minutes of visible grief all tangled up together. And Mom sat with me through all of it. She didn't leave. She didn't minimize. She sat there while I fell apart, and it was the first time she had ever done that, and it was enough. It was enough to start with. In the months that followed, things shifted. Slowly, imperfectly, the way real things shift, not all at once, not neatly, but movement all the same. Arthur Kemp reviewed everything. The transfers Renee had made were documented. She had not hidden them well, she hadn't expected them to be examined closely. After 2 weeks of conversations between lawyers and a very tense family meeting that I will spare you the details of, she agreed to return the money. Not all of it immediately. Douglas's business ventures had done what they always did, but on a structured timeline, documented, legally binding. She signed the agreement in Arthur Kemp's office and didn't look at me once while she did it. Renee and I have not spoken since that phone call. I don't know if we ever will. That's a door I'm leaving ajar, not open, there if she decides to walk through it with honesty and accountability, closed if she doesn't. I've stopped waiting for her to make that choice. It's hers to make or not make. My job is to stop organizing my life around her absence. Mom and I talk on the phone every Sunday now. It started awkwardly. We were both too aware of what we were trying to build, which made it feel a little like 2 people trying to learn to dance while watching their own feet. But it's getting easier. She asks about my work. I ask about her week. Sometimes we talk for 20 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. Last month, she drove the 2 hours to my apartment and we went to a farmer's market and had lunch, and it was just nice, ordinary nice. The kind of nice I had stopped believing I would ever have with her. The money Dad left me, both the formal bequest and the hidden account, changed my life in practical terms. I paid off my student loans, which I had been carrying for 12 years. I set aside a portion for emergencies. I kept a little for something I'd always told myself I'd do someday, which was take a week off work and drive the coast and sleep in small motels and read books I'd been meaning to read. I did that in February. It was raining most of the time and it was perfect. I still have the letter. All 4 pages, in the original envelope, kept in the drawer of my bedside table. I've read it maybe a dozen times since that first night. Each time it gives me something slightly different, sometimes comfort, sometimes sadness, sometimes a complicated feeling that doesn't have a clean name. But there is always, underneath everything else, the simple, irreducible fact of it. He saw me. My father saw me. He found a way to say so. And no amount of time or family dysfunction or financial mess or complicated grief can take that back. Maya Bird, don't let him forget it. I won't, Dad. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, then you already know why I needed to tell it. Because I think a lot of you know what it feels like to be the quiet one, the easy one, the one who doesn't cause trouble, doesn't demand too much, fades into the background of a family that doesn't mean any harm but causes it anyway, in all the soft, invisible ways that leave no marks and no evidence and no one to blame. And I want to say this directly to you, to whoever needed to hear this today. Being invisible in your family does not make you invisible. It makes you someone who wasn't seen yet. There's a difference. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the seeing comes late. It comes in a shaky-handed letter in a plain white envelope on a kitchen table. It comes in a cold cup of tea and a mother finally sitting still. It comes in ways you didn't expect, from directions you stopped looking. Don't stop looking. Hold your ground. Thank you for being here with me today. If this story moved you, if it touched something, drop the word letter in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, please consider it. I tell these stories because they matter, and your presence here is what makes that possible. I'll see you in the next one.